Welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys had your fill. The food was excellent, as always. There is still quite a bit of carrot cake out there. It is delicious. Carrot cake is for winners. That's what I've been told. So please be sure to grab some if you'd like. Before the international study permits became the topic du jour, artificial intelligence was the key topic that came up in the various different articulation committees that I would attend. So much so that last year at JAM, the keynote session really focused on the use of AI as it relates to transfer credit and the applicable use within higher education. The Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills has recently convened a working group to oversee the province's policy and practices as it relates to AI. And I will say, in full disclosure, just so that there's all transparency here, I am a member of this working group. But I'm not going to tell you about it because we have Ben Ferrel from the ministry who is here to give us an overview of what's going on with the AI policy working group. Many of you will know Ben. He has been a presenter at JAM a couple of times online. This is the first time we've had him in human form. So please, let's turn it over to Ben, who's going to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here in human form. Yeah, I will say this is a real treat to get to present in person and not have to kind of cringe through watching a video of myself played back, though I guess I will have that opportunity on YouTube. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Ben Ferrel, and I am the Executive Director at the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, responsible for digital policy and business transformation. And within that portfolio, I do have the distinct pleasure of being the ministry's representative and liaison with the BC Council on Admission and Transfer. And it's something that I deeply appreciate and has become really kind of fundamental to my work and the policy aims of our branch, and trying to really support how that feeds into the broader policy and activities of the ministry. So always a pleasure to be here. Lovely to see the familiar faces. And yeah, as Mike said, I'm going to be diving into a presentation on the work we're doing with regards to artificial intelligence. I will just, again, say before I start, this is not going to be perhaps the most exciting presentation you've seen on AI. We're being very intentionally practical and perhaps even non-provocative here. I just spent 2 days listening to people catastrophize or otherwise bring a huge amplitude to the feelings around this topic. And I think part of our job here is to try to bring that down a little bit and think about how we're going to work through this. So let's see if these tools are going to work for me. Is this an AI-related problem? There we go. So what is the digital learning strategy, just to kind of start at the beginning for folks that might be new to this? It's a multi-year strategy of the provincial government to support our post-secondary system and using digital technologies to provide flexible and high-quality learning opportunities. I think many of you have been living with this space for a very long time. It really came into the ministry's view in the last few years as we've seen the challenges that are stemming from the post-secondary systems, increasing reliance on digital technology, whether those are growing costs, the fatigue and burnout associated with people and institutions that are having to continuously adapt to these new technologies, as well as really a growing digital divide that we're seeing create barriers, frankly, for populations that are trying to access post-secondary. Against that, though, we also know that there are significant opportunities that technology can enable in post-secondary in particular, and we really did hear this firsthand from learners, where it actually enabled them to be able to attend post-secondary, to access their studies, to carry on their studies in circumstances where they wouldn't have otherwise been able to, whether that was based on barriers to attending in person, cultural barriers, or just life events that kind of took them out of that pattern that I think traditional on-campus and ongoing learning sort of requires. So we know that there's a broadening of the types of learning activities, the formats that are available to instructors. There is a whole world that this is unlocking, but there are a lot of barriers and challenges that need to be overcome, I think, to really fully realize the value there. And so the trend associated with this disruption certainly continues in all facets. And we know that artificial intelligence is really a major focal point of that disruption. Certainly it's being talked about in all contexts, whether that's what's happening in the workforce, what that's doing in our culture, and of course, what it means for learning. So just some basic aspects, as you can see, around what we've delivered to date. This is all voluntary. We're not creating prescriptive kind of provincial regulation or required policy at this point. And so I would encourage you to use the QR code if you haven't ever actually been to our provincial site. All of these resources are available, and they're there really to try to help assist institutions and individuals navigating this. So just a sense of some of the path that we've taken. The Digital Learning Advisory Committee released its recommendations to the public through the digital learning strategy kind of umbrella in the fall of 2022. At that time, we launched our public-facing communication website, and we initiated our implementation stage of this work, where we brought together a steering committee that is comprised of pretty well a representative from every one of our post-secondary institutions, generally at a senior level, to really hear the plans as we were getting into the rubber hitting the road, and to make sure that those were going to, avoid any major pitfalls, be that labor relations issues or other concerns. We have been convening the sector in a forum on this topic now, where our second annual is coming up in about a month. And part of our work was really thinking about how do we not only support institutions in navigating these challenges, but also how do we enable learners to navigate the post-secondary system more easily, gain their digital literacy skills, et cetera. So you can see that part of this was also the launch of Find Your Path, which was done by our partners Education Planner BC, and is a wonderful demonstration of how we can create provincial navigation tools. We've worked with BC Campus to launch a digital literacy hub. So for those that haven't seen that, we have developed a digital literacy framework for BC's post-secondary sector, and created an open educational resource hub to go along with that. And we have initiated 2 groups that are really looking at how we can build shared educational resources and technology, sort of frameworks for collaboration between the institutions and on technology deployment, development, or development of curriculum, as well as around professional development. And then the final thing I'll just touch on here from a context standpoint is also that we are partnering with BC Net. And there's some really exciting things that they are doing, where working to facilitate shared procurement of resources. We've recently funded them to develop a procurement process for curriculum management and calendar management software. They're also launching a repository to record all the different applications that are in use across the sector, privacy impact assessments for those, licensing agreements for those. So just all this capacity and foundational platform for better collaboration across the system is really what you should take away as a theme here. So on the specifics of AI, I will say the reason I provide that background is I think, as Mike said, last year this was AI was the keynote for this. This has been something that's been on the radar for some time. And there was a question about whether or not the ministry really need to step in this direction, what our role should be for that. And I think our goal was actually to try to create capacity for the sector to be able to respond to emergent technologies, sort of regardless of what those were. So there was a technology agnostic aspect to the work that we were doing. But ultimately, we decided that we would go out and canvass institutions to kind of understand how the management of AI within the institutions was going, where the challenges were, and whether there was a sense that there was a role for the province to step into this. It might have been an obvious answer to all of you, but for us, it's necessary to have good evidence before we're going to step in and start working on a policy. Just some highlights here of what we heard, that there was a need for clearer guidelines around, for example, the privacy and implications and other ethical issues, even around just institutional specific AI policies and guidelines. We heard back from the people that were responding to us that there was a bit of a gap in terms of having good, clear policy in place across the sector. And that really to facilitate the development of those things, to facilitate the required professional development, that we would really need provincial collaboration to support that. So that was a motivating response for us to get involved. And so we reached out with a call for nominations for people who would like to participate in this process. And we received a lot of interest back. This is actually a bit old now. It's not comprehensive. We have approximately 30 people that we are now trying to work as a working group on policy development. So those of you within policy development processes in your institutions probably know that's a big task, trying to manage a group like that. So we're very grateful that Dr. Neil Facina, president of Douglas College, has stepped forward to chair this group. I'm really looking forward to how he will be able to help drive us. But you can see there's comprehensive representation from our different sectors within the post-secondary system. Really, we're very intentional looking to make sure that we brought in some of our smaller institutions from more rural or remote locations in the province. We also are aiming to have a nice cross-section from different roles in institutions, but I will say it was an interesting aspect of this that we primarily received people from the teaching and learning centers presented as nominations for this, and signaled a little bit to us around the perception of this being a bit of a classroom issue. And certainly we think that we're going to have to work beyond that, and I'll get into that a little bit when I start talking about scope. So, how we're setting the stage for this group is that we have a couple of key kind of problem statements really around the fact that there are privacy and sort of other generally termed ethical considerations that need to be addressed when we're looking at the adoption of AI within a post-secondary context. We also know that it's very, very prominent already, right? It's pretty much ubiquitous. It's on your phone when you're searching something in Google, you're interacting with it. We know that lots and lots of people, whether they're instructors, students, staff, are using it when they're creating content, when they're completing tasks within their work. So it's very, very much on top of us already. So the purpose of this group is really to foster that collaborative process, to harness best practices, to harness expertise so that there's not the reinvention of the wheel required across the system. We want to really try to ensure that we have appropriate policies that are enabling an intentional usage of these tools where we are avoiding some of the pitfalls that may exist, whether that's infringing on copyright, whether that's inadvertently engaging in activities that may be considered academic misconduct, or where we may be actually falling victim to that data bias and some of the issues that can exist within the models themselves if we're starting to make decisions using AI that are going to impact learners or impact people. So our vision is really that of avoiding some of those potential downsides to this and being able to harness the opportunity. Now, as you can appreciate, this topic has immense potential scope. And so one of our tasks is really to manage that scope. So the way that we are approaching this, I think, is something that you'd be familiar with when you're either doing your own research or engaging with the government policy process. We start by looking around what's happening in our sector, what can we find out about what institutions are doing, what can we see other jurisdictions are doing, try and do a big scan, then look at, okay, based on that, where might the gaps exist within our specific context, and then where do we start to prioritize? And so ultimately, that's how we're trying to narrow this down. Now, before I go into sort of where we've arrived on that, I do just want to address one aspect of this topic that we will not be grappling with, and I hope this doesn't disappoint anybody too bad, but we will not be getting into the esoteric space of what AI means for post-secondary education and in that very philosophical standpoint. What does it mean to learn? What does it mean to have knowledge in a time when we have ChatGPT, when many people are probably recognizing the ability of these interfaces to do things that would have been previously very firmly in the domain of human intelligence. So that conversation is happening at many levels. We know nationally, the Council of Ministers of Education in Canada are grappling with that. The OECD and UNESCO recently joined forces to be looking at this in combination with what it means for the workforce. This is a discussion that will be playing out at levels beyond really the capacity and scope of where we want to address. So our focus really is bringing this, as I said at the beginning, into a practical lens. So ultimately, the steps that we're embarking on, and this will be happening in the coming months, is working with this policy working group to really focus in on our priorities, what it is that we should be biting off within the frame that I'll sort of walk us through in a minute. And then we'll be looking at breaking this group into sort of two work streams. And this will be ultimately the areas that we'll be trying to deliver value back to the sector for. So the first one is around looking at guidelines, looking at policies that can be articulated at a provincial level, ideally in a way that they can be adopted at the institutional level and then potentially localized into an institutional policy context. So we could be talking about universal guidelines. We could be talking then about model policy. And I'll touch on a little bit about how we're going to be approaching that. And then also looking at shared service and collaborative opportunities. One of, I think, our fundamental goals is to avoid furthering the digital divide that already exists and contributing to that sense that some institutions are leaps and bounds ahead of others in our public post-secondary sector, that students at those institutions are having very different opportunities to engage and learn from these technologies. So there's the effort of equity certainly underpinning this. So we have to start with framing how we're going to talk about the post-secondary community. What is that organism? How can we begin to break that into some streams of activity and some categories within that? So we're leveraging a framing from the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. This is simply because this was presented to us in our first meeting by one of our working group members, and I think provides a pretty useful way of just distinguishing, broadly speaking, the different aspects of institutional activity. Certainly there will be opportunity for us to nuance this to the extent necessary, but really we're just trying to establish that common language. Pardon me. And then once we have this sort of established as a frame for how we're going to dive into this, we'll then move into those two streams of work. So there will be, I think, a need for us to really attach within this where we think the highest priority areas are. And I've spoken to a few people today about this. For me, there's an interesting anecdote that really stands out where learners that are proceeding through a semester in a course and are utilizing ChatGPT or some other AI tool throughout the duration of their studies, arriving at their final exam, not having opportunity to do that, and then having a really negative outcome from a grade standpoint, failing or achieving a very low academic standard. And I've actually heard directly from faculty who see that as demonstration of how these tools are not useful. They do not support learning. I think that's the wrong interpretation of that. I think what's important here is that people need to understand what the expectations are for them when they're moving through their courses, and in particular when they're going to be assessed. And of course that the course has been designed with those expectations in mind so that the tools are being appropriately adopted and assessment actually reflects what the goal of that is. Again, not necessarily as concerned about that philosophical whether to include or not include, it's about the clarity. I think other areas of priority for us are certainly where these tools start to get into decision-making that affects individual outcomes, be that admissions, be that advising. And so these are all going to be pieces where we'll be listening to our group to hear where they see the biggest need. If we have capacity, we'll probably try to get through all those areas, but we're going to start with where the highest priority is. And then, as I said, we'll dive into these work streams. Now, so I think that maybe the main thing I just want to point out here is that we think that both aspects of these are very entangled, and we think that both are very fundamentally important. Our goal would be that we have, as I said earlier, some universal guidelines, but that we can ultimately identify where there's a need for specific policies. And ideally, what we are finding is that there are some institutions that have already done this work and that are going to bring that forward. And so we can work on sharing that out for the sector. So it is that collaborative approach, but that will ultimately also be informing how we are going to be looking at deployment. And I think there is that opportunity for the working group to be shaping the sort of relationship between these two streams of work as a bit of a clearinghouse. So we'll be structuring this ultimately, given the amount of capacity that we have. We'll have differing groups that are kind of working down these separate streams, but bringing their progress, their challenges, and their ideas back into that central working group for us to be exchanging, making sure that those things remain aligned. So, main point that I want to just touch on in terms of these guidelines is that we do understand there's task forces, steering committees within institutions. There are lots of different focal points of this activity happening within institutions, and I think what we're going to be really hoping is that we're able to draw on those examples, bring those for consideration in a way where there's transparency and I think just a appreciation of the offering of examples of how people are approaching this, and then presenting the sector with model policies and best practices back that can be adopted and localized. Again, I want to reinforce that this is not government policy that's mandating institutions to behave in a particular way on these topics. This is an effort at a collaborative policy development process, accessing subject matter experts from across the sector, leveraging the coordinating capacity that the provincial government has to facilitate those conversations, to bring, I think, the collective capacity of the system together so that not every institution has to do this. And we know that there are institutions where the capacity is such that it may take a lot longer or be something that is more difficult to attain. So our goal being here that we're just decreasing the effort for our sector at being able to have good, robust guidelines and policies informing how AI is being used. And then as it comes to collaboration and shared services, so we're here mainly to focus on, are there kind of a couple of different potential use cases here? Are there shared service approaches to actually deploying these technologies? Are there circumstances where multiple institutions can leverage a single instance of a technology, have a single set of experts that are supporting that, single IT resource, shared contracts, that sort of thing? Are there opportunities where we can collaborate more effectively on actual research and development around the use of or generating of new AI models in the province? Looking at bottlenecks for the uptake of AI. So, for example, do we have the talent when it comes to engineering, when it comes to some of these very specialized domains? Do we have the talent to be producing the programs and producing enough of those programs across our sector that we're going to be, supplying all of that expertise that's going to be in demand into the economy? Do we have the infrastructure for this? Is there research dedicated compute capacity in the sector? And I know we have some absolutely fantastic hubs around the province, but these are all these different dimensions of this challenge, and they are quite substantial. I'm sure we've all heard about how Microsoft is now reinstating 3 Mile Island to power their compute requirements. Like the scale of this is quite staggering. So we're trying to avoid the shotgun approach of a whole bunch of sort of small and isolated efforts and bring those together and see how, as a sector, we're able to really benefit from this, find that opportunity, find ways to build that talent ecosystem in the province and not just have that isolated, to have that accessible so that we're getting collaboration and opportunity across the full system. This was gonna, I think, unfold through a process of blue sky brainstorming. Ultimately, there'll obviously have to be a lot of assessment of the cost and scale associated with taking action in any one of these domains and what the potential impact is going to be. We're going to be looking at how this can align with other priorities. I'm thinking here around health sciences, digital creative in BC, where like some of our very sort of high priority local sectors, and then ultimately where funding sources are. I caught a little bit of a conversation before lunch about the provincial government's funding situation, and it is in a circumstance we know in the sector right now that resources are going to be very scarce. And so thinking about how we collectively also pool those business cases and go after funding, whether it's with the federal government, with some of our industry partners, that'll be a part of this. And so we're bringing in partners from around other ministries, jobs and economic development, et cetera, so that we can be making those connections with industry, making those connections with the federal government. Okay, so as you can tell, like it's early stages, giving you an opportunity to see this as we're just beginning to launch, get a sense of what we're up to, hopefully dispel some of the fear that this is going to result in a thou shalt moment. Definitely is not. This is intended to really, as I said, support success and reduce this challenge across our sector. This group has only met once so far. We have our next meeting in December. So, I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to come and share this with you at the start. I would love to always hear from you, whether it's today or if you want to reach out to me and let me know where these priorities are for you. But at this point, that is really the question that I would put to the audience, and I'm happy to answer any that want to come back. But I think, thinking about priorities from your standpoint, where do you see the biggest need for this type of work? And from a collaborative process, how do you see us finding that value proposition in the most meaningful way? So I'll leave it with you there. I appreciate your time.
We have a little bit of time for questions, so if anybody has a question, I would please encourage you to use the microphones, because that way everybody can hear you as well as online.
Thank you for your presentation. I don't think I noticed any private institutions in the list of members. So did they just not respond, or was the invitation not extended to them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We did not actually reach out to our private post-secondary sector in this. And that's not necessarily a bias about private institutions. It's merely that primarily with the actors that we are working with, there are constraints with how some of the public funds that will be going out or could be going out for this can be utilized within the private sector. So our focus is on our 25 public post-secondary institutions.
Okay, thanks.
There is a question in the chat just about whether your presentation will be available after the fact. So the answer to that is yes, we will be posting all the presentations after the fact, so you will be able to access them through the Whova app. Are there any other questions from the audience? All right, well, seeing none, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate that. That was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to continuing work on the policy group.